Let's get into the story. Jessica wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carried a tray of steaming dishes across the grand dining hall of the luxurious Imperial Hotel. At 7 months pregnant, every step felt heavier, but she refused to slow down. The salary she earned as a waitress barely covered rent and medical bills, yet it was her only means of survival. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the scent of fine cuisine filled the air, but to Jessica, it was just another exhausting night. She had once dreamed of a life where she and her husband, Vincent, would build a home together, eagerly preparing for the arrival of their child. But those dreams had faded, replaced by harsh reality. Vincent had abandoned her emotionally, leaving her to fend for herself. If she didn't work, she and her unborn baby would have nothing. Every night, she watched wealthy couples dine together, their eyes filled with love and laughter. She imagined how different her life could have been if Vincent had cared, if he had chosen to stand by her side instead of walking away. He had once whispered promises of forever, but now, she was nothing more than an afterthought to him. Vincent had moved on, living a life of luxury with his mistress, Juliet, while Jessica struggled to make ends meet. Even when she had begged him for help, he had dismissed her, claiming she was responsible for herself. The pain of his rejection was unbearable, but she swallowed it down, focusing on the baby growing inside her. This child was her reason to keep going, her reason to fight. Despite everything, Jessica refused to break. She worked tirelessly, hoping that one day, she would find happiness again. But deep inside, there was an ache, a longing for someone to see her worth, to remind her that she mattered. She had spent too many nights crying alone, wondering if love had truly abandoned her. Little did she know, her life was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would change everything. Vincent Charlton was a man who thrived on power and prestige. As a successful businessman, he had everything: wealth, influence, and a socialite mistress who adored the finer things in life. He had once been married to Jessica, but in his eyes, she had become a burden. The moment she became pregnant, he had lost interest, seeking excitement elsewhere. Juliet, with her perfect looks and glamorous lifestyle, had been the distraction he needed. She was everything Jessica wasn't: carefree, bold, and utterly devoted to his success. He had convinced himself that Jessica's presence in his life was unnecessary, a reminder of a past he no longer wanted. He barely thought about her now. As far as he was concerned, she was managing just fine. If she chose to work at a hotel instead of depending on him, that was her decision. He had provided for her once, and in his mind, she had squandered the opportunity. He never stopped to consider how much she had sacrificed for him, how she had supported his ambitions while setting aside her own dreams. To Vincent, love was conditional, and Jessica no longer met his standards. His world was filled with business meetings, lavish parties, and Juliet's insatiable desire for luxury. He convinced himself that this was the life he deserved. But fate had a way of rearranging lives, of forcing people to confront their choices. Vincent had no idea that his past would soon resurface in the most unexpected way. He had abandoned Jessica, believing she no longer had a place in his world. But what he failed to realize was that true love and destiny could not be ignored forever. Jessica had grown used to long shifts, to the ache in her feet and the exhaustion that settled deep into her bones. Working at Imperial Hotel wasn't easy, but it was her only source of income. The guests were demanding, the management strict, but she never complained. Every plate she carried, every table she wiped, was another step toward securing a future for her child. Some of the staff pitied her, whispering about how unfortunate it was for a pregnant woman to work so hard. Others judged her, assuming she had made bad choices that led her here. But Jessica ignored the stares and the murmurs. She had no time for self-pity. She had once envisioned a different life. Before her pregnancy, she had studied business administration, hoping to start a small company of her own. She had been ambitious, determined to create something meaningful. But love had altered her path. She had trusted Vincent, believed in the life they were building together. When he turned away from her, all those dreams had shattered. Now, she wasn't thinking about personal success, only survival. She wanted to provide for her child, to give them a life filled with love and security. If that meant working herself to exhaustion, so be it. But despite her determination, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, when the hotel emptied and the silence grew heavy, she found herself questioning everything. Was she making the right choices? Would her child resent her struggles? She had no answers, only the resolve to keep moving forward. She had no idea that the path ahead was about to shift dramatically, in ways she could never have imagined. The hotel was particularly busy that evening, with high-profile guests arriving for an exclusive business dinner. Jessica moved swiftly between tables, making sure everything was in order. The atmosphere buzzed with conversation, and she focused on her duties, avoiding unnecessary attention. But as she turned to deliver a bottle of wine, her breath caught in her throat. Sitting at one of the VIP tables, dressed in a tailored suit, was Vincent. She froze. It had been months since she had last seen him, and yet, here he was, laughing effortlessly as if their shared past had never existed. But he wasn't alone. Across from him sat a man of commanding presence, President Charles Gabriel. Jessica recognized him instantly. His name was known worldwide, a leader admired for his wisdom and integrity. She had never imagined she would see him in person, let alone under these circumstances. Jessica's heart pounded. Should she say something? Should she walk away? But before she could decide, Vincent turned slightly, his gaze skimming over her before flicking away without recognition. A lump formed in her throat. He had seen her. He knew she was there. And yet, he acted as if she were nothing. As if she didn't exist. Jessica's heart sank as Vincent's cold eyes swept over her. It felt as though the world had stopped moving, the bustling restaurant fading into the background. Her breath hitched, and, before she could compose herself, she took a tentative step toward his table. She hadn't seen him in months, and the sight of him sent waves of conflicting emotions crashing through her. Despite his neglect, despite everything, a part of her still hoped that perhaps, in some corner of his heart, he cared for her. But as she approached, her hopes shattered. Vincent, Jessica's voice trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She was his wife, after all, the mother of his child. She had every right to speak to him. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her words felt hollow, and her hands trembled as she set the wine glass down. Vincent didn't even glance at her. His attention was fully on President Charles Gabriel. With a practiced smile, Vincent spoke without emotion. "I don't know who she is," he said flatly, his voice dismissive. The words struck Jessica like a physical blow. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with disbelief. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. Her husband, the father of her child, had denied her in front of the most powerful man in the country. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she fought to keep them in check. Charles Gabriel, watching the interaction, could see the hurt on Jessica's face. His gaze softened with empathy. He couldn't understand why a man would treat someone so callously, but he couldn't ignore the raw vulnerability in Jessica's expression. Charles Gabriel had spent decades navigating the complex world of politics, business, and power. He had met countless people, shaken the hands of world leaders, and spoken to thousands of citizens, yet something about Jessica's pain struck him in a way he couldn't explain. There was an undeniable strength in her eyes, despite the obvious hurt. While Vincent's actions had been harsh, Charles was captivated by the quiet dignity with which Jessica carried herself. Her vulnerability was palpable, and yet, she had a quiet resilience that intrigued him. After Vincent's cruel denial, Charles couldn't help but feel a deep sense of protectiveness toward Jessica. He saw her standing there, the weight of her pregnancy showing on her slender frame, and knew instantly that she deserved more than the treatment she was receiving. A wave of frustration surged through him. How could someone like Vincent, who had so much, treat another human being with such disdain? As Jessica began to walk away, her head bowed in shame, Charles could no longer stand by. He excused himself from the table and followed her. "Excuse me, miss," Charles called softly, his voice calm but firm. Jessica froze, hesitant to turn around. When she finally met his gaze, she could see the genuine concern in his eyes. Without thinking, she started to speak, but Charles placed a hand gently on her arm. "I couldn't help but notice what happened back there. If you're comfortable with it, would you mind telling me what's going on?" His voice was warm, inviting her to share without judgment. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jessica felt heard. In that quiet moment, everything seemed to shift. Jessica wasn't used to someone showing such kindness, especially a man of power like President Charles Gabriel. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but somehow, it wasn't uncomfortable. The president stood before her, waiting patiently, his presence unwavering as she processed what to say. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she found herself telling him the truth, the full, painful story of her marriage to Vincent, how he had grown distant and neglectful, and how, despite carrying his child, she had been left to navigate the hardships of life alone. Charles listened intently, his expression softening as the story unfolded. When she finished, there was a long silence between them. Then, without warning, Charles did something that shocked her to her core. "Jessica," he began, his voice steady and full of sincerity. "I can see the strength in you. You've endured so much, and I admire that." He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "I want to ask you something important." Jessica blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart racing. Charles stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I want you to marry me," he said simply, his words hanging in the air. Jessica's eyes widened, her mind reeling. "What?" she whispered, barely able to comprehend his proposal. "Even though I'm pregnant with another man's child?" she added, the question more for herself than for him. Charles smiled gently, his tone filled with quiet honesty. "Yes. I've lost something very important to me, and I know that I can never be the biological father to your child. But I promise to love you both, to be the father your child deserves." The sincerity in his voice made Jessica's chest tighten. She hadn't expected this, not at all. Charles Gabriel had never been one to openly share his vulnerabilities. He was a man who had built his career and reputation on strength, decisiveness, and unshakable confidence. But standing before Jessica, he felt a sudden need to be completely honest with her. He had made an important decision, and he didn't want to leave anything unsaid. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. Jessica looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and uncertainty. "I'm not capable of having children," he continued, his voice tinged with sadness. Jessica's brow furrowed, her mind struggling to grasp the gravity of what he was saying. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Charles sighed, his expression somber. "I was in a car accident a few years ago. It left me infertile, unable to father a child. I've struggled with it, but I've come to accept it. I wanted you to know this before you make any decisions about us." He paused, searching her face for a reaction. "I won't be able to give you a child of your own, but I promise that I will love you both with all my heart, just as I would if I were the biological father." For a moment, Jessica stood there in silence, her heart racing as she processed his words. She had never expected this revelation. Yet, as she looked into Charles's eyes, she saw no pity, only sincerity. His honesty touched her deeply. Despite everything she had been through, she could feel something warm and real building between them. She was torn, unsure of what the future held, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure: Charles was offering her a chance for something new, something real. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope stir within her. Vincent watched the interaction from a distance, his lips curling into a smirk. He had no intention of confronting Charles directly, not in front of the other guests. But the sight of Jessica accepting Charles's attention irritated him to no end. How dare she seek comfort from someone like him? She was nothing more than a second-hand woman now, discarded and pregnant with another man's child. He had moved on, so why was she still clinging to the past? He leaned back in his chair, watching as Jessica left with the president, her expression unreadable. The audacity of her accepting Charles's proposal was laughable. He had spent years building his own empire, surrounded by people who admired him, and now he was watching his ex-wife get courted by a man far more influential than he ever could be. To Vincent, it felt like an insult. He scoffed loudly, causing a few of the guests at the table to glance his way. But he didn't care. His pride would not be humbled. In a low, almost mocking tone, he muttered to the others at the table, "It's laughable, really. A man like that settling for her, she's a broken woman, carrying someone else's child. What a joke." He expected his comments to provoke laughter or agreement, but instead, he was met with silence. Charles Gabriel's decision to publicly endorse Jessica only deepened the gulf between him and Vincent. And as the night went on, Vincent couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in his chest. His empire was fragile, and he had no idea that everything he thought he had worked for was about to slip through his fingers. Charles's proposal to Jessica was not just an offer of love. It was a statement of change. In front of the room full of influential individuals, Charles made it clear that his loyalty now lay with Jessica and her unborn child. He could feel Vincent's eyes on him, the air thick with tension as the businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It was clear to everyone present that this was more than just a marriage proposal, it was a symbolic shift in power. Jessica, once neglected and overlooked, was now a woman with a future shaped by her own choices, a future where she was loved and valued. For Vincent, it was a humiliating moment. Not only had he been exposed as a neglectful husband, but his pride and position were now on the line. Charles's actions signaled the end of Vincent's influence in the business world. With one simple word, fired, Charles sent Vincent's career into freefall. Vincent could only watch as his life unraveled before his eyes. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now left with nothing. The weight of his decisions crushed him, and he realized too late that he had lost everything: his wife, his power, and his dignity. Jessica stood at the edge of it all, uncertain about her future but feeling an unfamiliar sense of strength. The president's actions had shifted something within her. No longer would she be defined by the failures of her past. It was time for a new chapter, one filled with love, respect, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Jessica sat alone in her modest apartment, staring out the window at the city skyline. She had been offered a life she never dreamed of, but now that the reality of the situation had sunk in, she felt overwhelmed. Charles Gabriel, the most powerful man in the country, had proposed to her with such sincerity. But was it truly love? Or was he simply drawn to her vulnerability, her pain, and the fact that she was carrying his child's half-sibling? She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She had always prided herself on being strong, but now, for the first time, she felt uncertain about her future. Would accepting Charles's proposal mean abandoning everything she had known, including her sense of independence? She thought of Vincent, her neglectful, distant husband who had spent years ignoring her and prioritizing his mistress, Juliet. How could she trust a man like Charles when Vincent had broken that trust so thoroughly? At the same time, how could she say no to someone who was willing to give her a life filled with love and security? The prospect of a fresh start with Charles seemed like a lifeline, but the emotional scar left by Vincent's abandonment was still raw. Jessica longed for peace in her heart but found herself stuck in a cycle of doubt. Her child would grow up with a father who cared, someone who would cherish him. And yet, the decision felt like a betrayal of the life she had once dreamed of. With Vincent for hours, Jessica grappled with the decision. She walked through her memories, tracing the path that had led her here. When had her dreams of a happy family turned to dust? When had she allowed herself to settle for the neglect that Vincent had shown her? With every passing moment, she realized she deserved more than that. She was worthy of love, of respect, and of a future where she didn't have to carry the burden of emotional neglect alone. And in that moment, she made a choice, not just for herself but for her child, for their future. She would trust again, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. She would embrace the possibility of a new beginning with Charles. The days that followed were filled with anticipation and uncertainty, but Jessica knew she had made the right decision. Charles Gabriel was a man of integrity, and his actions spoke louder than any words. As she prepared to meet him again, she was nervous but resolute. She knew that accepting his proposal would mean stepping into a world of public scrutiny, but it also meant leaving behind the pain that had defined her life for so long. She had already begun to picture a future with him and their child, one where love, not neglect, would form the foundation of their family. On the day of their meeting, Charles greeted her with warmth and patience, his genuine affection for her clear in every glance. He had never pressured her into making a decision, but his steadfast support gave her the strength she needed to move forward. "Jessica," he said softly, taking her hands in his. "I know this is not an easy choice. But I want you to know that I am here for you. Whatever you decide, I respect it." His words were simple, yet they filled her with a sense of peace. This was not just about him wanting her. This was about both of them building a life together, one based on mutual respect and understanding. Jessica took a deep breath, looking into Charles's eyes as she made her final decision. "I will marry you," she said, her voice steady. A smile spread across Charles's face, and he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Thank you, Jessica. You won't regret this," he whispered. In that moment, Jessica felt a sense of relief wash over her. It was the beginning of something new, a life where she could flourish, surrounded by love and acceptance. And as she looked into Charles's eyes, she felt a quiet excitement stir within her. She was no longer just a woman lost in the shadows of a failed marriage. She was a woman with a future, one that held the promise of true happiness. In the weeks that followed, Jessica settled into her new role as Charles Gabriel's fiancée, but it was far from an easy transition. Though the media painted her as the perfect match for the president, she couldn't ignore the undercurrent of tension that surrounded her. One person, in particular, made it clear that her new life was not going to be as idyllic as it seemed: Juliet. Vincent's former mistress was not pleased with the turn of events. For years, Juliet had played the part of the glamorous woman on Vincent's arm, enjoying the fruits of his wealth and power. Now, with Vincent's career crumbling and his status falling from grace, she found herself left out in the cold. Juliet had always been a woman of means, accustomed to the luxury and prestige that came with Vincent's influence. But as his empire crumbled, so did the lifestyle she had come to rely on. Her frustration simmered, and it didn't take long for her to turn her attention toward Jessica. She saw the pregnant woman as the embodiment of everything she had lost. Jessica had gained what Juliet thought was rightfully hers. Juliet wasted no time in attempting to undermine Jessica, spreading rumors and making pointed remarks whenever she could. But Jessica remained unshaken. She knew that Juliet's bitterness was born of jealousy and insecurity. Juliet had lived a life based on materialism and status, and now that Vincent had nothing left, so too had her life's foundation crumbled. Jessica could see through her, and as time passed, she realized that Juliet's attempts to tear her down only made her stronger. She had Charles by her side, and in him, she found a kind of love she had never imagined possible. While Juliet floundered, Jessica flourished. She knew that, unlike Vincent and Juliet, she was building a life based on something much more meaningful than wealth or power, love and respect. Jessica's wedding to Charles Gabriel was a grand affair, but despite the opulence, it felt incredibly intimate. Every detail was carefully planned to reflect their journey together, a journey filled with overcoming obstacles, personal growth, and healing. As she walked down the aisle, Jessica's heart swelled with a mixture of emotions. She had come so far from the young woman who had once worked tirelessly to support herself and her unborn child. Now, She was about to marry a man who not only loved her but embraced her child as his own. The ceremony was a beautiful blend of elegance and warmth. Charles's vows were heartfelt, speaking not only of the love he had for Jessica but of the family they would build together. Jessica, in turn, promised to stand by him, to support him in both triumph and challenge, and to love him with all her heart. As they exchanged rings, the weight of the moment sank in. This was not just a political union, but a personal one. It was a bond forged out of love, trust, and mutual respect. Jessica's eyes shone with unshed tears as Charles kissed her, sealing their vows. For Jessica, this was a moment of true transformation. She had faced heartbreak, rejection, and uncertainty, but now, she was stepping into a life that promised love and fulfillment. She was no longer the woman who had been neglected by her husband. She was the future First Lady, a woman whose strength, resilience, and capacity for love had captured the heart of the most powerful man in the country. The wedding was not only a celebration of their love but a symbol of the second chance that Jessica had given herself. She had found her place in a world of wealth and power, but more importantly, she had found love, a love that would guide her through the rest of her life. Jessica's life as the First Lady was filled with new challenges, but it was also filled with unexpected joy. The transition into her new role was not without its difficulties, as she navigated the public eye and her new responsibilities. But amidst the whirlwind of events, her focus remained on her family. Soon, the moment she had been waiting for arrived. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she and Charles named Benjamin. The birth of their son marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. Charles was by her side through it all, offering his unwavering support. He was there for every moment, from the first cry of their son to the quiet nights when Jessica held Benjamin close in her arms. Despite the challenges that came with raising a child in the public eye, Jessica felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. Charles, though unable to biologically father children, loved Benjamin as his own. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. As she adjusted to motherhood, Jessica discovered a newfound strength within herself. The palace, once an intimidating symbol of wealth and power, became a sanctuary filled with love. She poured her heart into being the best mother she could be, while also supporting Charles in his duties. Together, they formed a family grounded in love, compassion, and respect. And as Benjamin grew, Jessica knew that she had created the life she had always dreamed of, a life filled with unconditional love and happiness. The winds of change had swept through Vincent's life, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. Jobless and abandoned, he found himself standing at the edge of his former world. The mansion that had once been a symbol of his success now felt like a prison. His company had crumbled, his relationships had deteriorated, and his once loyal mistress, Juliet, had disappeared into the arms of another wealthy man. Vincent had lost everything, and in the silence of his downfall, he was left to confront the truth of his mistakes. For years, he had been so consumed by his ambitions and his relationship with Juliet that he failed to see how he had treated Jessica. She had been the one who supported him, the one who had believed in him, but he had neglected her at every turn. The shame of it was unbearable. How had he let someone like Jessica slip through his fingers? And now, she was married to Charles Gabriel, living a life he had never imagined. Every time he thought of her, the weight of regret pressed down on him even harder. He had missed his chance to be the man she needed, and now, he would have to live with the consequences. Yet, in the midst of his sorrow, Vincent found something unexpected: clarity. He realized that he could no longer blame others for his downfall. He had allowed his own choices to lead him here. And in that painful realization, he began to understand what true change meant. If he ever wanted redemption, he would have to take responsibility for the way he had treated those around him, especially Jessica. It was a hard pill to swallow. Juliet's world had always been centered around wealth, status, and power. She had built her life on these pillars, finding herself drawn to Vincent's success and the luxury it provided. But with Vincent's downfall, those pillars crumbled, leaving her with nothing but a hollow shell of the life she had once known. No longer was she able to afford the extravagant shopping sprees or the lavish dinners. The allure of Vincent's influence, which once seemed so irresistible, had dissipated. Her world was changing, and she was no longer the woman at the center of attention. As the days passed and Vincent's financial situation became dire, Juliet grew more restless. She watched as Vincent spiraled, growing bitter and angry, losing the very things that had once made him attractive in her eyes. To Juliet, he was no longer the powerful man he had been, and the image of him that had once thrilled her now seemed pathetic. The lavish lifestyle she had come to expect was no longer within reach, and with every passing day, she realized that the man she had once adored was not the same. She had always been interested in the trappings of success, and Vincent no longer offered that. It was in this moment of reckoning that Juliet made her decision. She sought out a wealthier man, someone with the means to restore the lavish lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. The man she chose, though equally wealthy, was less interested in emotional connections and more in the material benefits that came with a relationship. For Juliet, it was the perfect fit. She could have the luxury, the attention, and the lifestyle, without the emotional burden of Vincent's flaws. With a final, heartless farewell to Vincent, Juliet left, making it clear she had no intention of looking back. As she stepped into this new chapter, she realized, deep down, that she was still searching for something that had eluded her all along, genuine love and fulfillment. Jessica's transition into her new life had been anything but easy, but she was finding strength in her new role. As First Lady, she not only had the opportunity to support Charles in his political endeavors, but she also felt a deep sense of responsibility toward the people she now served. With her public platform, she began to advocate for causes close to her heart, particularly those that focused on helping single mothers, struggling families, and women facing adversity. She was determined to use her position not only to uplift herself but to uplift others who had endured the hardships she had once known. In private, Jessica continued to thrive as a mother to Benjamin. She was still learning the ropes of balancing her duties as First Lady and as a mother, but Charles's unwavering support made it easier. Together, they worked as a team, navigating the challenges that came with their public roles while creating a nurturing, loving environment for their son. Jessica had never imagined that she would one day find such fulfillment in her family life, but with Charles by her side, she had everything she had ever dreamed of. Each day, she grew more confident in her new identity, not just as a wife and mother but as a woman who could make a difference. As her initiatives began to take root, Jessica saw tangible changes in the lives of those she sought to help. She started various programs aimed at providing financial literacy, job training, and emotional support for women who found themselves in situations similar to the one she had once been in. The sense of purpose this work brought her filled her with pride. Jessica had gone from a waitress struggling to make ends meet to a woman who was shaping the future for others. She was no longer a passive bystander in her own life. She was an active participant in the betterment of her community. This new phase of her life wasn't just about personal success, it was about lifting others up, sharing her journey, and inspiring change. Months passed, and Vincent's life slowly began to stabilize. Though he had lost everything, his wealth, his position, and his pride, he had started working on rebuilding himself from the ground up. After years of relying on others to carry him, he now found himself relying on his own abilities, a humbling experience that led to personal growth. He opened a small business and began to regain some financial stability, but the emotional scars from his past, especially his treatment of Jessica, weighed heavily on him. The more he reflected on his life, the more he realized how selfish and negligent he had been toward her. One afternoon, Vincent sat in the small office of his new business, his gaze fixed on the photo of Jessica he had kept hidden away for so long. In his heart, he felt an overwhelming sense of regret, not only for the way he had treated her but for how he had let his pride and ambitions dictate the course of his life. He knew that his actions had hurt her in ways that were irreversible. He had failed to be the husband she deserved, and now, She was living a life he could never have imagined, a life filled with love, support, and purpose. A wave of guilt washed over him as he realized that, no matter how much he had rebuilt his external world, his mistakes would never be truly erased. It was in this moment that Vincent decided to seek Jessica out, not for his own sake, but because he needed her to know that he recognized the pain he had caused. He reached out to her, sending a heartfelt letter explaining his deep remorse and the steps he had taken to better himself. He wanted her to know that he had learned from his mistakes, that he truly regretted the way he had treated her, and that he hoped, in some way, she could find it in her heart to forgive him. It was a difficult decision to make, but Vincent knew that without this act of contrition, he would never truly be at peace with himself. He may not have a place in her life anymore, but he wanted her to know that he had changed, and he hoped, one day, she could understand that he was sorry. When Jessica received Vincent's letter, she felt a mixture of emotions. It had been so long since she had thought of him, and the words he had written stirred up memories she had buried deep within her. His apology, though heartfelt, did little to change the years of hurt and disappointment that had marked their marriage. Still, Jessica couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. She knew the man Vincent had been, a man consumed by pride, ambition, and his own selfishness. But she also knew the man he could have been. It was clear that he had taken responsibility for his actions and had worked hard to turn his life around. However, forgiveness, Jessica realized, was not something she could easily offer. Not because she held on to resentment or bitterness, but because she had moved beyond the pain of their past. She had come to understand that forgiveness didn't necessarily mean reconciliation. It didn't mean letting someone back into her life or allowing them to hurt her again. It meant accepting that the past was gone and embracing the future without carrying the burden of old wounds. Jessica had built a life with Charles, a life filled with love and understanding, and she had no intention of allowing the ghosts of her past to interfere with her present happiness. With a deep breath, Jessica composed a reply to Vincent. She thanked him for his letter and acknowledged the sincerity of his apology. She told him that she had forgiven him, not for his sake, but for her own peace of mind. She also made it clear that she would not be returning to the life they had once shared. Vincent had his own path to follow, and she had hers. She wished him well, but she would not look back. Her life, with Charles and Benjamin, was all that mattered now. It was time to move forward, leaving the past where it belonged, behind her. Jessica had been through so much, from the emotional trauma of her marriage to Vincent, to the uncertainty of her pregnancy, and now to her new life as First Lady. Despite all the challenges, Charles stood by her side with unwavering support. He had always made her feel like she mattered, like her happiness was just as important as his. The love he showered her with was not one of fleeting gestures but of consistency, kindness, and understanding. He had never expected her to be anything other than herself, and that acceptance gave her the courage to embrace her new life. There were moments when Jessica couldn't believe her luck, that someone like Charles could love her so deeply. His affection wasn't conditional, and she saw it every day in the way he cared for her, whether it was the quiet moments in the palace or the public appearances that they made together. He always made sure that she knew she was the most important person in his life. Even when the pressures of being the president were overwhelming, he always found a moment to reassure her that he would never let her feel alone. His love had filled the void that Vincent's neglect had left behind. Yet, Jessica still struggled with the weight of her past. She hadn't completely shed the scars that her marriage to Vincent had left. She feared that one day, something might happen to make her unworthy of Charles's love. But Charles, perceptive and caring as he was, recognized these fears. One evening, after a particularly challenging day in the public eye, he took her hand, looked into her eyes, and reassured her once again. "You are enough, Jessica. You are everything to me, and nothing will ever change that." His words became a lifeline for Jessica, pulling her away from the self-doubt that sometimes crept in. She realized, for the first time in a long while, that she was truly loved for who she was, flaws and all. As First Lady, Jessica had found a new sense of purpose. While the role came with its own set of challenges, including constant public scrutiny and the delicate balance of personal and professional life, Jessica felt an undeniable calling to use her newfound position for good. She had seen firsthand the struggles of single mothers and low-income families, and she knew that these women needed someone who understood their pain, someone who could advocate for them. With Charles's full support, Jessica launched several initiatives aimed at providing financial resources, education, and emotional support for women in need. Her initiatives quickly gained traction, attracting attention from both local and international organizations. Jessica's story of overcoming hardship resonated with many, and people began to see her not just as the wife of the president, but as a powerful advocate for women. Through her work, she was able to create a network of support that helped women rebuild their lives, much like she had done. She poured her heart into every project, from job training programs to emergency shelters for women in crisis, and the impact was immediate. Jessica was no longer just a woman who had once been mistreated. She was a beacon of hope for those who felt lost and overlooked. Despite the whirlwind of responsibilities, Jessica found herself more fulfilled than ever. The weight of the palace and its demands no longer felt like a burden. It felt like an opportunity to make a tangible difference in the world. She would visit schools, attend community events, and meet with organizations to further her mission. Everywhere she went, she spoke with conviction and empathy, always reminding others of the importance of resilience and hope. Jessica had found her voice, and in using it to empower others, she had finally begun to heal the last remnants of her past pain. It was clear that her purpose was not just to be the First Lady of the nation but to be a voice for those who had none. Vincent, on the other hand, had taken a very different path. After his fall from grace, he had spent months in self-reflection, questioning every decision that had led to his downfall. The lavish lifestyle that once defined him had vanished, and in its place, he found himself starting over in ways he never imagined. He knew that he couldn't go back to the man he had once been, selfish, arrogant, and dismissive of the people who truly mattered. He needed to change, but the road ahead was not easy. He started by taking responsibility for his actions, not just toward Jessica but to everyone he had hurt along the way. As part of his redemption, Vincent began a small business, one that would allow him to prove to himself that he could succeed without relying on his past connections. It was a humble beginning, but he was determined to make it work. He worked long hours, often late into the night, pouring everything he had into his new venture. Slowly, he began to regain some financial stability, but more importantly, he began to rediscover a sense of self-worth that had been buried beneath his ego for so long. He learned the value of hard work and the importance of genuine relationships, and little by little, his perspective on life began to shift. However, as Vincent rebuilt his life, he couldn't escape the shadow of his past mistakes. His relationship with Juliet, which had once been based solely on materialistic desires, had fizzled out. As he grew more focused on his personal growth and future, he realized that Juliet was never really invested in him as a person, but rather in what he could provide. Their relationship was no longer viable, and they parted ways. Vincent, although saddened by the end of his relationship, now knew that his true happiness would not come from wealth or external validation but from within. He was ready to make peace with his past and embrace a new future, one where he was truly living for himself, and not for the approval of others. As Vincent began his slow but steady climb back to stability, Juliet found herself facing an entirely different reality. Her relationship with Vincent had been one of convenience, a means to an end. Now that he was no longer a source of the lavish lifestyle she had come to depend on, she felt the emptiness of her choices more than ever. Her new partner, though wealthier, lacked the emotional depth Vincent had once offered. He was interested only in status and image, just as she had been, but there was no warmth between them, no real connection. Juliet realized too late that the life she had built for herself was a facade, and she was left feeling lonely and unfulfilled. The materialism that had once fueled her desires now felt like a heavy burden. The luxury apartments, the designer clothes, the extravagant vacations, all of it seemed hollow when she had no one to share them with. She began to wonder what her life would have been like if she had chosen differently, if she had stayed with Vincent, or if she had sought something deeper and more meaningful. But it was too late for regrets. The man she had loved for his wealth and status was gone, and she was left to face the consequences of her own choices. Juliet's loneliness became unbearable. She tried to reconnect with Vincent, reaching out to him through mutual acquaintances, but he had moved on. He no longer saw her as the woman he had once adored, and his life had taken a direction she was no longer part of. Juliet, for the first time, had to confront the reality of her own decisions. She had built a life on superficial foundations, and now, those foundations were crumbling. She was left with little but the realization that material wealth could never replace genuine love and companionship. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and Juliet was left to question how much of her life she had truly lived for herself, and how much she had lived for the approval of others. Jessica's journey had been long and difficult, but with each step, she grew stronger. As First Lady, she had found her voice and her purpose. But more than that, she had found herself. She no longer defined herself by her past struggles or her relationship with Vincent. She had built a life that was rich in love, fulfillment, and purpose. Through her advocacy work and her role as a mother and wife, she had become a symbol of resilience. The media, the people, and her peers saw her not just as the wife of the president but as a woman who had overcome tremendous odds to get where she was. She was admired not just for her beauty or grace but for her inner strength. Jessica's transformation was not just visible to the world. It was something she felt deeply within herself. She had come to understand that the person she was today was the result of everything she had been through, the hardships, the pain, the disappointments, and that she could never have reached this place of strength without them. She had learned to forgive herself, to accept her past, and to move forward with a heart full of love and compassion. The love she shared with Charles had nurtured her, and her bond with Benjamin had made her realize just how much joy and meaning life could hold. Her work continued to expand, and Jessica found herself being invited to speak at events, to share her story, and to inspire others. She was no longer the woman she had once been, struggling to make ends meet and seeking validation from those who didn't value her. She was now a powerful woman in her own right, one who had found a deep sense of peace and purpose. But despite all of her success, Jessica knew that her true fulfillment came not from titles or recognition but from the love she shared with her family and the lives she touched through her work. Her growth had been profound, and she had finally become the woman she had always dreamed of being. As Benjamin grew, he became the living symbol of the love and unity between Jessica and Charles. From the moment he was born, Charles had embraced him as his own son, never once making a distinction between biological parentage and love. Benjamin, a sweet, bright-eyed boy, had formed a deep bond with Charles that transcended any notions of blood relations. Jessica couldn't help but marvel at the way Charles interacted with Benjamin. He wasn't just a father in title, but in every sense of the word. Their connection was effortless, a natural blend of affection, laughter, and learning. Charles would read stories to Benjamin before bed, teaching him about life, love, and the importance of kindness. Watching Charles with Benjamin made Jessica realize just how much her own life had transformed. She had feared that her child would grow up in a broken home, with his father far removed from his life, but instead, Benjamin had two loving parents who doted on him. The warmth that filled their home was not just from the comforts of palace life but from the genuine affection they shared. Every milestone in Benjamin's life, from his first steps to his first words, was celebrated with joy, but the most significant moments were those when he called Charles Daddy without hesitation, when he sought him out for comfort or approval. It was a beautiful testament to the kind of father Charles was, patient, supportive, and endlessly loving. Despite the challenges of public life, where expectations and pressures constantly loomed, their family found a quiet sanctuary within their home. Charles's relationship with Benjamin strengthened not only their family bond but also reaffirmed the values that Jessica held dear. It reminded her of the importance of nurturing love and connection in a world that sometimes felt chaotic and disconnected. As Benjamin blossomed into a kind and thoughtful boy, Jessica and Charles knew that their efforts to create a loving, supportive home would shape his future in ways that nothing else could. For Jessica, watching Charles and Benjamin grow together was one of the greatest joys of her life, a constant reminder of the love and growth that had brought them together. Vincent, after years of struggling with the fallout of his actions, had slowly begun to rebuild his life. His business, once a small venture, was now growing, and he was starting to gain the respect of those who had once written him off. Yet, his journey of redemption was far from easy. There were nights when he lay awake, grappling with his regrets and the pain of losing Jessica. He had never imagined that his decisions, his neglect, his selfishness, would lead him to this place. However, Vincent was determined to move forward, not as the man he had once been, but as someone who could prove to himself and others that he was capable of change. To truly rebuild, Vincent realized that he needed to confront his past, particularly his behavior toward Jessica. He had been dismissive of her, not understanding the strength and resilience she possessed. He now saw, with painful clarity, that he had not only lost her love but had also lost the respect of his peers, and ultimately, himself. As part of his path toward redemption, Vincent reached out to those he had wronged, including Jessica. His apology was sincere, but he knew that he could not expect forgiveness from her. He no longer sought her love or approval, but he hoped that by acknowledging his mistakes, he could begin to heal. His journey was no longer about winning back what he had lost, but about building a new, more meaningful life. While Vincent's road to redemption was a lonely one, he found solace in knowing that he had the power to change his future. He immersed himself in his work and continued to develop his business. Over time, he learned the value of hard work, humility, and integrity. Although his life was far from the one he had once envisioned, Vincent had started to find peace in his new reality. He no longer harbored the bitterness or entitlement that had once defined him. Vincent had come to understand that true fulfillment did not come from wealth or status, but from self-awareness and growth. He could never undo the damage he had caused, but he had begun to walk a path of redemption, one where his past mistakes no longer defined him. One quiet evening, as he sat alone in his office, Vincent found himself reflecting on everything he had lost, and everything he had gained. His life had taken unexpected turns, and he was no longer the man who had been so consumed by ambition and pride. His mind drifted to Jessica and the time they had spent together. Despite everything that had happened, he still carried a deep sense of respect for her. She had been his anchor, the one person who had loved him without condition, and he had let her slip away. He couldn't deny the regret that gnawed at him, but he also realized that those feelings no longer had the power to control him. His thoughts turned to Jessica's life now, how she had blossomed into someone who not only thrived in her personal life but had also become a beacon of hope for others. He had seen news reports about the initiatives she was leading to help single mothers and families in need. Vincent admired her strength and her ability to turn her pain into something positive. He often thought about the contrast between their lives now, her fulfillment, her family, and the love she shared with Charles and Benjamin, and his own sense of solitude and introspection. For the first time, Vincent understood the true depth of Jessica's strength. She had not only survived but had flourished, something he had never expected from her during their marriage. It was in this moment of reflection that Vincent fully accepted the reality of his situation. Jessica was no longer part of his life, and he could never turn back time to fix his mistakes. But he had learned something invaluable in his journey. True redemption was not about reclaiming what was lost but about accepting responsibility for one's actions and making a genuine effort to become a better person. Vincent had come to terms with the fact that he had lost Jessica, but he also recognized that his personal growth was the only way he could move forward. It was no longer about regret but about becoming a man worthy of respect and peace. Juliet's life, once filled with the thrill of material gain and the excitement of her relationship with Vincent, had become a hollow existence. After leaving Vincent, she had hoped that her new partner would provide the wealth and excitement she craved, but the reality was far from her expectations. The relationship, which had been based on superficial desires, quickly grew cold. Her partner was more interested in status and appearance than in forming a genuine connection, leaving Juliet to face a loneliness that she had never anticipated. She spent countless nights in lavish restaurants and upscale parties, surrounded by people who shared her need for superficial indulgence. But despite the luxurious lifestyle, Juliet couldn't shake the emptiness she felt inside. The life she had built for herself felt like an illusion, one that could easily shatter at any moment. She had always defined her worth by the things she owned and the people she associated with, but now, she began to realize how hollow that lifestyle truly was. She missed the days when Vincent had been a part of her life, when she had felt a sense of excitement and adventure in their relationship. But now, all she had were fleeting moments of pleasure that left her feeling emptier than before. Juliet began to look inward, questioning the choices she had made and the path she had taken. The materialistic lifestyle she had clung to now felt like a prison, and she wondered if she would ever find fulfillment beyond her possessions. She tried to reach out to Vincent, hoping for some connection, but he had moved on, focused on his own journey of growth and redemption. The reality hit her hard. Vincent, whom she had once so easily discarded, was now a different man, one who was no longer interested in the superficial relationship they had shared. Juliet was left alone with her regrets, wondering if she would ever find the meaning she had been seeking all along. As Jessica's work continued to thrive, she reached a significant milestone in her life. Her foundation, which had started with humble beginnings, had grown into a well-established organization that provided support and resources to thousands of women. It was a testament to her dedication, resilience, and the love she had poured into her work. Jessica had come a long way from the waitress at the upscale hotel, and her story was now one of inspiration to women across the world. She had built something lasting, something that would continue to make a difference for years to come. One evening, during a charity gala held in her honor, Jessica took a moment to reflect on how far she had come. The room was filled with powerful women, community leaders, and advocates, all gathered to celebrate the work her foundation had done. As she stood at the podium, speaking to the crowd, Jessica realized that she had achieved everything she had set out to do and more. She had turned her pain into purpose and had created a legacy that would impact generations to come. It was a proud moment for her, not because of the accolades or the recognition, but because she had found her true calling and had used her position to help others rise above their struggles. In that moment, Jessica realized that her true fulfillment came not from the title of First Lady or from the public accolades, but from the lives she had touched and the difference she had made. She had become a symbol of hope for women facing adversity, and she had finally reached the place where she could look back on her journey with pride. She was no longer defined by her past mistakes or the challenges she had faced, but by the strength, love, and growth that had shaped her into the woman she had become. The future was bright for Jessica, and she knew that her work was far from done. The legacy she was creating would continue to inspire others, and in that, she found the deepest satisfaction. Jessica and Charles's marriage continued to grow stronger each day. Over time, they found that their relationship was not only built on love but also on mutual respect, trust, and shared goals. Their connection had deepened far beyond the public eye, where they were often seen as a picture-perfect couple. Behind closed doors, they were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other through the demands of their respective roles. Charles often reassured Jessica that her happiness was his top priority, making sure she felt valued both as his wife and as a woman with her own purpose. Jessica, for her part, had settled into her role as First Lady, but her heart was always in the work she did to support those who were struggling. Charles admired her dedication, and he was always there to encourage her when the weight of her responsibilities felt overwhelming. The couple's teamwork became a solid foundation for their growing family, and their marriage was an example of how love could thrive when two people respected each other's dreams, passions, and individual identities. They often took time out of their busy schedules to enjoy quiet moments together, simple moments that reminded them of the depth of their bond. Despite the challenges of public life, they both found peace in knowing that they were in it together. Charles, ever supportive of Jessica's initiatives, had grown to admire the woman she had become, seeing her as not just the love of his life but as someone who inspired him to be better. For Jessica, knowing that she had a partner who saw and loved her for who she truly was brought a sense of fulfillment she had never imagined. Together, they were stronger than they had been apart, and, with each passing day, they were building a love story founded on trust, respect, and unwavering support. As Vincent moved further along his path of self-improvement, he found a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. He had no illusions about the damage he had caused, nor did he expect things to return to the way they were before. Instead, he focused on rebuilding his life piece by piece, learning valuable lessons from his past mistakes. The small business he had started was growing, and he began to find satisfaction in the work he did, no longer chasing after fleeting wealth or status. His life, once consumed by ambition, now revolved around steady progress and personal growth. What had begun as a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of success had transformed into a fulfilling endeavor. Vincent learned the importance of humility and hard work, values he had long ignored. He realized that, unlike the materialistic goals he once pursued, true fulfillment came from within and from making amends for past wrongs. He no longer spent his days lamenting his lost opportunities or holding on to bitterness. Instead, he found peace in knowing that he was no longer the man who had made those mistakes. He had become someone capable of change, and that was the most important victory. One of the most important changes Vincent made was his ability to forgive himself. No longer haunted by his past, he understood that personal peace was not about erasing his mistakes but about learning to live with them while striving to be better. He had come to terms with the fact that he would never regain Jessica's love, but he no longer resented her for it. She had moved on, and he was happy for her. The life she had built with Charles was everything she deserved. Vincent's peace did not come from regret, but from knowing that he had taken control of his future, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly content. Jessica, Charles, and Benjamin continued to build a life full of love, laughter, and understanding. Their home had become a sanctuary, a place where they could be their true selves, away from the public eye. Charles's love for Benjamin had only deepened over the years, and their family was a testament to the strength of love that wasn't bound by blood. Benjamin saw Charles as his father in every sense of the word, and their bond continued to grow. Jessica often marveled at how seamlessly their family had come together, and she was filled with gratitude for the life they had created. The love within their family was the foundation of everything Jessica had worked for. She had fought for a better life for herself and her son, and now, with Charles by her side, she was able to provide that. Benjamin's laughter echoed through their home, reminding them daily of the joy that came with being a family. The couple had made a promise to each other to always prioritize their family, no matter the pressures of their public lives. Together, they created a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love, a stark contrast to the coldness Jessica had once known. As Benjamin grew older, he became a reflection of the values that Charles and Jessica had instilled in him: kindness, compassion, and the understanding that love and family meant everything. The family's journey was a reminder of the power of redemption and the beauty of starting anew. Jessica and Charles's love had not only transformed their lives but had created a legacy for Benjamin, one that was built on the lessons of personal growth, mutual respect, and the enduring power of love. Their family was proof that happiness could be found in the most unexpected of places and that love, when nurtured, could heal even the deepest wounds. Juliet had spent years chasing after wealth and status, convinced that they would bring her happiness. But as her life continued to unravel, she found herself questioning the choices she had made. The materialistic lifestyle she had clung to now seemed empty, and the thrill of indulgence had worn thin. Juliet's relationship with her new partner was shallow and unfulfilling, and she began to feel the weight of her loneliness. The lavish dinners, the designer clothes, and the glamorous parties could no longer mask the emptiness she felt inside. She began to reflect on the choices she had made throughout her life, particularly her relationship with Vincent. In hindsight, she realized that she had never truly loved him. She had simply been drawn to his wealth and status. Her desire for a glamorous life had blinded her to what really mattered: genuine connection, love, and respect. Juliet found herself longing for something deeper, something real. As she looked at her life now, she saw a woman who had made choices based on surface-level desires, only to be left with a sense of regret and longing for something more. In a moment of clarity, Juliet acknowledged her mistakes. She understood now that her obsession with wealth and status had led her down a path of loneliness and regret. She wished she could go back and make different choices, but she knew that was impossible. Instead, she vowed to change. Juliet began to focus on herself, realizing that true happiness came from within, not from external possessions. She sought therapy and tried to rebuild her life, not for anyone else, but for herself. It was a long road, but Juliet was finally beginning to understand the value of self-love and the importance of making choices that aligned with her true desires, rather than superficial dreams. Jessica had always believed that her struggles were not just for her own growth but also for the benefit of others. With the success of her foundation, she had created a platform where women facing adversity could find support, resources, and empowerment. Over the years, her work had inspired countless women to pursue their dreams and rise above their circumstances. Her story of resilience had become a symbol of hope, showing that no matter the obstacles one faced, personal growth and love could transform lives. As Jessica's work continued to flourish, she began to focus on creating long-term programs that could provide sustainable support for single mothers and families in need. She worked tirelessly to expand the reach of her foundation, ensuring that more women had access to education, financial support, and mental health resources. Her commitment to helping others had become her greatest joy. She no longer measured success by titles or accolades, but by the lives she touched and the change she was able to inspire in others. Jessica's legacy was not just one of personal triumph, but of community transformation. Her foundation became a beacon of hope for those who had struggled as she once had. Her story was no longer just hers, it had become the story of every woman who had ever fought for a better life. As she looked around at the impact she had made, Jessica felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She knew that her journey had not only changed her own life but had also made a lasting difference in the lives of others, ensuring that her legacy would endure for generations to come. One day, Vincent attended a charity event hosted by Jessica's foundation. He had seen her on television many times, speaking about the causes she held dear, but it was only in person that he truly understood the depth of her work. He stood in the back of the room, watching her interact with the women whose lives she had changed. It was a humbling moment for him. He had never imagined that Jessica would become the beacon of hope she was today. He knew that he had played a part in shaping her journey, but he also knew that the woman standing before him was far stronger than he had ever given her credit for. As the evening unfolded, Vincent found himself face to face with Jessica. There was no anger or resentment between them, just a quiet understanding that their paths had diverged for a reason. Jessica smiled at him, acknowledging the man he had become, not the man he once was. It was a moment of closure for both of them, one that allowed them to move forward with peace in their hearts. Vincent had come to terms with his past, and Jessica had come to understand that forgiveness didn't always mean reconciliation, it meant letting go. The evening was a turning point for Vincent. He realized that while he would never have the life he once envisioned with Jessica, he could still contribute to society in meaningful ways. He decided to dedicate himself to helping others, using his own story as a way to encourage change in others who were struggling. In this full-circle moment, he saw that redemption didn't come from the past, it came from what he did with his present. And for the first time, Vincent felt that he was on the right path. Jessica had long ago come to terms with the past. While the memories of her struggles remained, she no longer allowed them to define her. Her life with Charles, the love they shared, and the family they had built had given her a sense of peace she never thought possible. She had learned the value of forgiveness, not just toward others but also toward herself. There was no need to hold onto the bitterness that had once consumed her. She had moved beyond the pain of her past, focusing instead on the love and joy that filled her present. One afternoon, as she sat with Charles, reflecting on their journey together, Jessica realized how much they had both grown. The road had been difficult, but it had led them to a place of deep connection and fulfillment. She had let go of her past mistakes and found peace in knowing that they were both walking the same path now, united in love and purpose. They had found something rare, a love that was not defined by external circumstances but by the bond they had created. In the quiet moments, when the world slowed down, Jessica understood that letting go wasn't about forgetting, it was about accepting. She no longer needed to carry the weight of her previous life with Vincent or the pain it had caused. The future was hers, and with Charles by her side, she knew that anything was possible. Letting go of the past had opened the door to a future filled with love, growth, and endless possibilities. Jessica and Charles had built a life that many would envy, but for them, it was simply the fulfillment of their dreams. Their love had withstood the tests of time, proving that true love was about commitment, sacrifice, and respect. Charles had always put Jessica's happiness first, and she had always honored the space he gave her to be her true self. Their love was not the kind that was born from convenience or status. It was the kind that flourished through understanding, patience, and mutual growth. Their journey had not been without its challenges, but each obstacle they faced together had only strengthened their bond. Now, as they walked hand in hand through their life together, they felt a profound sense of fulfillment. They were not just partners in marriage but in every aspect of their lives. The love they shared had created a family that was rooted in the understanding that love was not about perfection but about growth, support, and respect. They worked together to nurture Benjamin, teaching him that love wasn't a given, it was something that needed to be cultivated and protected. Their marriage had become a living testament to the idea that love, when nurtured, could overcome any adversity. They both knew that their love had the power to change the world, as it had changed their own lives. It was a love built on the foundation of mutual respect and understanding, and that love would last far beyond their time together, continuing through the lives of their children and the generations that would follow. Benjamin had grown into a thoughtful and compassionate young boy, influenced by the love and wisdom of both Jessica and Charles. He carried with him the lessons they had instilled in him, lessons of kindness, resilience, and the importance of family. Charles had never been just a father in title. He had been a constant source of love and guidance for Benjamin. Their bond was unbreakable, built on the firm belief that family was not defined by blood but by love and devotion. As Benjamin entered his teenage years, he began to show signs of leadership and a deep sense of justice. Jessica and Charles were proud of the young man he was becoming, recognizing that their nurturing had shaped him into someone who cared about making a difference in the world. They supported his dreams, whatever they may be, knowing that he was destined to follow a path of compassion and service, much like the one they had modeled for him. In the quiet moments, as they watched Benjamin grow, Jessica and Charles found immense pride in the person he was becoming. They had built a life together, one full of love, laughter, and growth, and they knew that their love had laid the foundation for Benjamin's future. Whatever challenges lay ahead for their son, they had given him the tools to navigate them with grace, compassion, and strength. Benjamin's future was filled with endless possibilities, and Jessica and Charles knew that their love for him would guide him every step of the way. Jessica and Charles had long learned that true happiness came from love, kindness, and growth, not from wealth, status, or titles. Together, they had created a life full of meaning and purpose. They had faced many challenges, but through it all, they had grown stronger, their bond deepening with each passing day. Their journey together was a beautiful testament to the power of love and the importance of staying true to oneself, no matter the obstacles. The world knew them as the first couple, but to each other, they were simply Jessica and Charles, a loving husband and wife, committed to building a life of joy and fulfillment. They continued to work side by side, making a difference in the lives of others through their shared initiatives and their unconditional love for their family. They had become an example of what it meant to rise above one's circumstances and find happiness in the love that surrounded them. As they sat together, hand in hand, watching Benjamin play in the garden, Jessica and Charles knew that they had created a life that was truly their own. They had built something lasting, a legacy of love, compassion, and resilience that would continue for generations to come. They were living their happily ever after, not because their lives were free from struggle, but because they had learned to love with everything they had and never gave up on each other. It was the kind of happiness that could only come from personal growth, redemption, and the love of a lifetime. That's the end of the story. What did you learn about the story? Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.